So I remember when I was in year 6 and it came around to the first Tuesday in November, and that means Melbourne Cup time. And as we always did, and as a lot of school kids do, the teacher cut the newspaper and cut out all the squares, and everyone got a horse. They drew a horse out of the hat. They wheeled in this is back when you had to wheel in TVs, right? They wheeled in the TV, TV that was as deep as it was wide, and this grainy sort of image, they wheeled it in and all that sort of stuff. We all gathered around and we were watching the horse race, the Melbourne Cup. So I'd gotten a pretty good horse. I thought my odds were pretty good. Not that I'd gambled anything right, but as a 12-year-old, I'm thinking my odds of whatever are pretty good. And to my horror, we got to about 100 or 200 metres before the last turn, and my horse was second to last. And I thought, that's it. It's all over. There's no hope for me anymore. There's no coming back from this. And I ripped up my piece of newspaper and had a little bit of a mini meltdown, as I had want to do. Other people can decide whether I still have want to do that, but that's not what we're here to talk about. But anyway, I had a little meltdown. And then to my surprise, what happened coming through the middle of the field was my horse. And all of a sudden, my horse won. And I thought, that's fantastic. And then I had to think about how do I glue my bit of paper together again. But I couldn't believe it, that I thought all hope was lost. And then out of nowhere, my horse came through and won and was like, yeah, go Josh, that's awesome, etc., etc. Now, the reason I tell that story isn't so much to show that I won a sweep in a horse race. But what I'm telling that story about is about that bit in the middle of the story. That time when I was watching that grainy TV and I thought, there's no coming back from this. It's a pretty inane example. But the reason I mention this morning is as I look back on my life, I can find many other examples that were probably a lot more serious and much more had much more at stake than just a running of the Melbourne Cup, where I've had a moment where I've thought in the middle of my experience, God, there's no coming back from this. I don't see a way forward in my experience. I don't see how good can come from this experience. I don't even know where and how I can see your presence with me in what I'm going through at the moment. And I want to wager that I'm probably not the only person here today that's had something of that experience. When we've looked at the experience of our life and we find ourselves going, I actually have no idea how I'm going to come back from this. And we can experience this in a whole range of different areas. It might be in an area of maybe sin and struggle in our life. We think about our faith life, something that I'm struggling with, we think about sin as these places where we look for love in all the wrong places. That we have these areas of attachment in our lives, and that we can try to defeat those patterns of behaviour, to find new ways of living. We can often find we come back to the same old sin time and time again. And we can find ourselves going, well, I don't see a way through this. I've been struggling with this for such a long time, and I don't see how I'm going to find a way to defeat this and move into the freedom that God has for me, that I can find that all I'm left with is my experience of sin and my shame in these things that I struggle with. It might be an area of brokenness or woundedness in our lives, those areas where life's taken a bit of a chunk out of us. Through an experience that we've had, through a difficulty that we've faced, that has left us feeling a little bit beaten up and broken inside. And we find that no matter what we do, it keeps having some sort of impact on our day-to-day life. That impacts my relationships, my work, my school, my home life, my faith life, whatever it might be, that we have these areas that seemingly seem to have power over us. And the more and more we try to grow through it, what we find is we're left in a sense of frustration and even at times a sense of despair. Related to that is those areas of suffering and sickness in our lives. That might be physical suffering, it might be mental, social, emotional, spiritual, whatever it might be, that we all know areas of suffering in our lives, areas of loss, of sickness. And we power on and we labour on, but we just think, oh my goodness, I don't know how much longer I can keep going with this. And we can find ourselves in something of a helpless situation. It might even simply be an area of darkness in our lives. An area that we look at that maybe no one else knows about. And the more and more we realise we're in that place, the more and more we feel like we're isolated and alone. You know, a bit like Jesus on Holy Thursday when he's down in the dungeon, in the cell, in the old cistern under the high priest's house, and he appropriates that beautiful psalm. My one companion is darkness, that all have abandoned me, that we can have that experience of isolation. And in each of those little things, we can experience our own little deaths in our life. There's areas of life where we don't see life, but all we see is an experience of death, and that can leave us feeling defeated. That whatever it might be, whether it's those things I've just rattled off or something completely different entirely, that we've had that experience of being in that place and seeing, I have no idea how I'm going to come back from this. I don't see a way back from this situation, this circumstance that I'm facing. And if that's you, if maybe you've had that experience in your life before, maybe that's something of your experience of life at the moment that you're wrestling with and you're carrying something that you can't see a way through. The story of the gospel today is a story of hope for each one of us. That even in the midst of the Easter joy we've been celebrating in these 8 days, that we can even feel like maybe I can't celebrate it or can't feel the joy of that because of what I'm going through, right? And well, if that's true for us, well, it's definitely true for Thomas in the gospel, right? So he's not there, who knows where he is. But when Jesus comes back, the disciples all encounter him and they meet the risen Lord. But Thomas is absent, and he rocks up and they tell him the story, and he says, well, look, no. It's just not possible. And he says, unless I see his hands, his feet, unless I see his side, I won't believe. And we can give Thomas a bit of a ride here. We can be pretty hard on him, thinking, doubting Thomas and all that sort of stuff. But what I think Thomas is moving out of in this moment is he's seen Jesus on the cross from a distance. He knows about his hands and his feet being pierced. He knows about the lance being thrust into the side of Jesus' final way of ensuring the certainty of Jesus' death. And he's saying there's no coming back from that. You can't come back from that. It's impossible. In his grief and in his sorrow and his pain of losing one who was so close to him and his suffering in that moment, he says, surely there's no coming back from that. We fast forward 8 days later. Jesus doesn't sort of appear with his arms crossed and saying, Thomas, ye of little faith. He doesn't scold Thomas. He doesn't reprimand him. But he actually offers to meet Thomas's request, to meet this condition that Thomas had placed on belief. Why? Because such is Jesus' mercy. He sees and he knows what Thomas is going through, and he meets him in that place, and he invites him to place his hand in his side. And at this moment, I just want to draw on that last line from the second reading today. You might have missed it, where John speaks of the water and the blood that give witness. And what John is alluding to is what he mentions in the 19th chapter of his gospel, is that moment when Jesus' side is pierced with the lance, and it says at once blood and water flowed out of his side. As I mentioned, that piercing of the side was meant to be the sign of certainty and surety of Jesus' death. But in his resurrection, it becomes transformed. That what became the sign of certainty of death becomes the sign of certainty for new life, that it becomes the sign of the new life that Jesus has won for us, that the church is born from the pierced side of Jesus, that the water and the blood from the earliest days of the church came to symbolize not just Jesus' baptism and death, but into the baptism that we're all baptized into and into the gift of the Eucharist that we partake of every weekend and even here today. That what was the sign of certainty of death becomes the fountain of divine mercy. That out of the wounded heart of Jesus flows his divine mercy for each and every one of us. So what Jesus is doing, he's meeting Thomas and he's meeting him with his merciful gaze, and he's saying to him, and he's drawing him into that which was the place of certainty, that for Thomas was a place of there's no way back from this, now becomes for Thomas the fountain of new life. It's from this very place that life flows, and what leads Thomas to the most perfect profession of faith of the entirety of John's Gospel, where he says, "My Lord and my God, my Lord and my God." Jesus wants to bring each and every one of us back from that place of no return. That he wants to pour his divine mercy, his love into the places in our lives where we feel like there's no coming back. That he meets us with his merciful gaze and immerses us into his divine mercy. That area of sin becomes a place of mercy and forgiveness. That brokenness becomes a place of healing and restoration and wholeness. That suffering and sickness becomes a place of healing and comfort and solace. That darkness becomes a place of light and his presence, and death, even death itself, becomes a place of resurrection and new life. That the invitation before each and every one of us on this Divine Mercy Sunday is to bring to him those places of seeming no return and cry out for his mercy and allow him to wash us with the great love that he has for us. To accept that invitation that he gives to us to draw close to his wounded heart broken open in love for the world. And so as we come to the Eucharist this morning, this very fount of mercy, this fount of mercy, let's allow our hearts to cry out with Thomas, "My Lord and my God," and to encounter in that the resurrection life that he offers to each and every one of us today. Amen.